Welcome, everyone, to the show. This is Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. I'm your host, Matt Kaufmann, and with me is Ted Witzig Jr. Ted, welcome to the show.
Hello, Matt. It's great to be here.
He is a resident clinician here at the counseling service, and glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Ted, we're going to talk about redeeming transitions.
Yes.
And so provide us a little bit of context. What do we mean by a transition, and are they going on in my life, or is this for somebody else?
Yes. Transitions are constant motion in our lives to move from where we currently are to somewhere else.
I even think of the classic sixth grade assignment where you chronicle the timeline of your family, for example.
Go.
And all of those, in a sense, are transitions, aren't they?
They sure are. There's a couple kinds of transitions. Some are welcome, some we're looking forward to, and some are unwelcome, which we get pulled into. When we talk about welcome transitions, we're talking about the ones that people are looking forward to, like it might be a 15-year-old looking forward to learning to drive or being able to drive on their own. Somebody might be excited about going off to college or starting a new job or getting married.
Right.
And those are very exciting things, and welcome transitions are ones that we push for, that we
anticipate.
We anticipate. Unwelcome transitions, on the other side, are ones that we feel like we get pulled into. And they're things that are going on in life, and nobody gets to skip those. They're part of our life, but it's things like watching a parent or grandparent age and go into a nursing home.
Right.
Or seeing somebody lose a job, for example. Something that we didn't anticipate, and all of a sudden, boom, there we are.
So even in those, we have both the anticipated unwelcome transitions, and then we have the unexpected loss of job, loss of a loved one, that sends us into transition whether we were ready for it or not.
Exactly. But sometimes, too, unwelcome transitions are things like just the kids growing up and moving out of the house. And while there is sometimes a lot of joy when that happens, there's also kind of a mixture about that. Like, oh man,
a reset of what is normal.
Yeah, life is moving on, and this is awkward. And who am I now that I'm not caring for these children at home?
So you're really casting a little bit of a vision of what we mean by transitions. They're both welcome. They're also unwelcome in a sense, and large and small.
That's right.
We go through, even in a day's time, we go through a number of transitions.
Sure.
A transition to a work, right? I came here. That means I have a different role than what I was 2 hours ago when I was at home.
Exactly. Think about a family whose schedule goes from the school year to summer. Okay,
right.
That's a transition, or the back to school. That's a transition, and every family feels it that has school-aged children.
Yeah,
and not bad, but it's transition.
Ted, whether they are welcome or unwelcome, and whether they are small or large, there is some commonality in transitions, isn't there? There is a way to transition through in terms of having some upheaval or having a new normal.
Sure. You can think of transition as moving from a state of what is familiar to the state of what is unfamiliar, chaos, and then back to a new normal. So if you think of it, we oftentimes use the word picture of a transition bridge. So think about a bridge on one side of the river, and there you are. It's familiar, it's comfortable, it's what you know. And many people they would choose the familiar over the unfamiliar any day of the week.
Sure. And that's me.
There you go. And you know what? Because there's something comfortable about that. Transition then moves us out from that place, and sometimes we're moved out over the bridge, and we sometimes refer to that as unsettling. That is a process. Now, a planned transition, people think through that unsettling, and they're thinking about the positives and the negatives of making this transition. When we get thrown into a sudden transition, sometimes we go immediately into the unsettling phase, and we're right into the center part of the transition called chaos.
So you're really showing there are some steps to transition, and sometimes we don't realize them, but there is an uprooting of yourself.
That's right.
And if you know that transition's coming, you do that over time.
That's right.
But if something is thrown at you, you think of a loss, right? Yep. All of a sudden, whether you wanted that uproot or not, it's happened.
It's happened.
And now you are journeying across this bridge to a new normal.
Mm-hmm.
and there's a chaos in between.
That's right. And that chaos is that place where we don't feel that rootedness. We know we can't go back to the way we wish it was, the way we wanted it to be, or the way it was where we felt rooted. But we're also not in the new normal. And so it feels like we're up in the air a bit.
Do you hold your breath when you go over bridges?
No, I don't.
Well, you know what? you turn blue in the face if this doesn't happen quickly.
Yeah,
but we want to get settled, don't we?
There's no question. And I think that desire to have something firm under us and to know we're planted is very, very human, very, very understandable. But that is also where we're like looking for this roadmap to like take me from point A to point B in the straightest way. And you know what? Sometimes that roadmap just isn't available to us.
So if I'm in a moment of chaos, for example, I'm in between settled point A to a new settled point B, I'm in this chaos.
Yep.
Because I'm in that chaos doesn't mean things are going terribly wrong.
No, it doesn't. And in fact, when I think of our missionaries that move from the States to somewhere overseas, or if I think about somebody that gets married and moves to another place, they have to figure out things like, where do I go for groceries? How do I get to point A to point B? And how do I learn this language? All those different things are there, and they're not bad. It just means you're not feeling rooted or settled.
And I think that's an important point as we talk about in this podcast. We're talking about transitions, both welcome and unwelcome.
Correct.
Because sometimes that puts us in a bit of a tailspin when it's a welcome transition. We're like, I'm happy that I'm married,
yes.
But why am I struggling like this?
Yes.
Oh, well, you're in the middle of these shores, and that's not bad. That's to be understood.
Well, think about the delight of a couple that welcomes their first baby into their home, and they're delighted to see this new creation. It's just so wonderful. And
everybody with children smiles.
Yes, because especially when they said, "Oh, we're just gonna, just go on like normal and things like that," and then they find out that having a child is like a tsunami on their schedule, right? And it's wonderful, and at the same time, somebody who is used to having some order in their day, all of a sudden it goes, wait a minute, I'm having trouble getting a shower by noon.
You had no idea how much inertia that 10-ounce bundle of joy has.
For sure.
Okay, so Ted, now land us on the other side of this shore then. How does that work, and what does that feel like?
The resettling phase takes time, and sometimes it's not long. Sometimes it takes months or longer. But the point here is this, that it is about finding this new normal, and it's a struggle sometimes to find a new normal, especially with unwelcome transitions. But what ends up happening is as the new normal becomes more familiar, there becomes more rootedness, and oftentimes people don't recognize that they've ended up in settled until oftentimes they go like, oh yeah, you know what? I am feeling more settled. It's not like I can say to somebody, oh, you know what? Give it 7 days, give it 21 days, and you will feel settled.
Yeah. And I think that is actually a lot of hope in that, Ted.
Definitely.
That settledness happens. And then, going back to where we began, it becomes a point on our timeline.
It does.
A very important point.
It does.
It's one that we would definitely cite, saying this was transformative in my life.
It was.
Okay. Ted, we're going to use kind of as a spinal column for this podcast series on redeeming transitions is a biblical account of Jacob.
Yes.
Jacob went through a transition, and everybody goes through transitions. We could look at David, Abraham, Moses, and the rest. Mm-hmm. But Jacob's kind of got a special, very articulate transition from his home life, which was a bit disorderly and dysfunctional. Jacob and his brother Esau and his mom and his dad and deception. And he gets sent away to go to Laban's house, his uncle, and he finds himself kind of right in the middle of here in Bethel. And he has some important encounters. Walk us through that. What's this look like?
Yes. Jacob's transition starts off with deception. It starts off with family drama and bad cutoffs. And then he is headed to his uncle's house to try to find a wife.
Great time for marriage?
I wouldn't suggest it, quite frankly. But the point here is this, that he is out walking in this desert place, and he's going to a place that he doesn't know, to find a wife that he doesn't know, all these things, because he just made some really bad choices in his relationships. And here it comes. It's nighttime, and he goes, you know what? I need to sleep. And so he lays down there because it got dark, and uses some stones for a pillow, which had to be very different than what he was used to.
Well, okay, I got to stop you right there, Ted. I mean, if there's a sure tell sign of a person who doesn't know how to camp,
That's right.
it's a person who piles up pillows for rocks for a pillow.
No question.
And Jacob was no camper. I think the scriptures bear that out, right?
Yeah, Esau would have handled this much better than Jacob. But Jacob, he was out there, he used stones for a pillow, and there he is. And then he has this dream, this vision, and he sees this ladder, the angels going up and down the ladder, God at the top of the ladder, and receives some messages from God that are very, very pivotal. And Jacob actually wakes up to seeing God wanting to work in his life. And when Jacob recognizes God wanting to work in his life, he all of a sudden then sees this stony place, this transition, as something that is much bigger. So he ends up taking the stones that he put his head on for a pillow and ends up turning it into an altar and starts worshiping God.
Isn't that a picture of redemption?
That is.
This place has now been redeemed.
That's right.
This place is Bethel, and for our listeners, you'll find it in the 28th chapter of Genesis, that this becomes a monumental place, a place that Jacob will go back to in his thoughts has been recorded, a place that's more important than his home and more important than Laban's place.
Yes.
Right? This place where he intersected with God. And to him, he was there on a whim, and it was a desperate place.
Yeah.
It was a place of transition, kind of the middle of the river, as you mentioned before, this bridge.
It was right in chaos.
It's right in chaos. And God changes the stony place to be now a place where an altar can be made and worship is done.
Yeah.
And we want to use this in this series to be somewhat of a model.
Yes.
So there's some things to take away, right?
Definitely.
Lead us through what lessons we're going to learn and apply from Jacob's transition.
All right. We've got 4 main lessons that we're going to cover in this podcast. There are many more that you could draw from this, but the first one is found in verse 14, where it says, all the families of the earth will be blessed. What his transition teaches us is that transitions are an opportunity to bless others. The next one is in verse 16, where Jacob said, the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And what we learn from that is that Jacob's transition taught him that he wasn't a product of his environment. The third one is in verse 18, where it says he took the stone that he had put for his pillows and set it up for a pillar. And we're going to talk about how transition brings us to worship. The fourth point we're going to cover is found in verse 20. If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my Father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. What we learn about this is that Jacob's transition helped him to clarify who he was and what it was that he truly needed.
Transition is redeemed then by our transition blessing others, by our transition helping us see that we're not a product of our environment, by our transition being a stage for worship, and our transition helping clarify who we are and what we need. I think that's very helpful.
It is. When you have a coupon and you go to the grocery store, how much is that coupon worth?
Nothing.
But when you take that coupon and you hand it to the clerk, all of a sudden it becomes worth 50 cents or worth $1.
Right.
And so what happens is when you take that and you put that piece of paper down, it is then redeemed for something worth more than its apparent value. And that's what we mean by transitions here, that when we go through them, sometimes we're going, I don't know, Lord, why am I here? How am I going to get out of this? What are we going to do? But that's where we find in this that God redeems, and he makes it worth something more than we can see or imagine.
And a couple of things come to mind when you even use that example of redemption in a coupon, is you have to give it to the right person for it to be redeemed, right? You give that coupon to the wrong store or the wrong clerk, in the wrong setting, they just look at you and say, what is this?
Right.
But to the right person, and that person is Christ, right? That person is God. He is going to be the Redeemer here.
That's right. In terms of being able to see God's eternal purposes, that Christ-likeness has a goal, that heaven is real, all those things, our vision is so limited, and that's often what happens when we're in transitions. We're kind of shocked into the moment or focused on the here and now. And what we want to do is help listeners kind of step back and see the bigger picture and get a glimpse of what God sees when He sees transitions.
I want to then place this on these two different camps of transitions. Welcome and unwelcome.
Yes.
For the unwelcome, that makes a lot of sense because there seems like nothing good can come out of this.
Right.
Out of this loss, out of this difficult situation that has come upon me. But we're saying that transition can be redeemed and God can redeem it. But also the welcome, sometimes we have, our sights are way too short-sighted for the benefit of even a welcome transition. And so there's hope here too.
No question. I think for the person in the unwelcome transition, we are not trying to say that the transition itself or the pain that you're feeling is automatically good. We're not trying to convince somebody, hey, wow, it's great you're in pain. What we are trying to say is that coming out of it, God, by His grace and His power, can take things that seemed like millstones, that certainly our adversary, Satan, would like to be millstones around our neck, that God can take those and turn those into stepping stones over time. And sometimes we won't understand that fully until we get to heaven. Sometimes in life we'll be able to say, oh boy, look at what God brought out of this. Also, in welcome transitions, like you said, sometimes our vision is just way too short, too simple, or we have presupposed this is going to be the blessing out of this. I know this, option A here, this is going to be the blessing, when all of a sudden we find out that God has different
bigger purposes.
Bigger plans. Yeah.
So as we bring this episode to a close, Ted, cast a little bit of vision as we look further. We're going to have 2 more episodes that continues this conversation. What can our listeners expect?
Our listeners can expect that we're going to go through each of these 4 redemptive qualities, and we're going to apply and give applications to how they can think about the transitions they're going through in their lives, whether big or small, welcome or unwelcome, and use Jacob's life as an example that they can kind of say, oh, this is how this can apply to my life.
Terrific. And with that, to our listeners, we trust that this series could be a blessing to you as we intend to break the bread of life and allow Him to minister to us in our transitions. As we all know, we have countless transitions that come and intersect our lives every day and throughout the years that we live. So we look forward to those future conversations. Thanks.